This episode is brought to you by freedadcourse.com. You are always one conversation away from changing your life, and the power of hello is something that I subscribe to every single day, and I'm always saying hello to new people everywhere I go. Increasing your opportunity, increasing your connection, and getting access to the solutions to the problems that you are facing, whether you're on active duty or just beginning your veteran transition or even transitioning out for 20 years. On the other side of hello are the solutions that you're looking for. Again, head on over to freedadcourse.com. Get your 5-episode audio course to create more connection, create more friendships, and get back to living the life that you're trying to design.
Dory 1, this is Fire Team Delta. Dad's coming home.
Welcome to the Military Veteran Dad Podcast, where it is our mission to bring every dad home. I am your host, Ben Cloy. I'm a United States Marine veteran, husband, and a father. We will bring authentic conversations to inspire action in your life so we can close the gap between the dad you are today and the dad you want to be tomorrow. This is the Military Veteran Dad Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 53 of the Military Veteran Dad Podcast. If this is your first time listening, I'm your host, Ben Cloy. And on this podcast, we dive into all the topics related to fatherhood, marriage, raising kids, having a life, being able to live a fulfilled life, and creating a legacy worth fighting for. And if this is your first time, welcome to the podcast. Wednesday, Christmas. So I would like to take a chance to wish each one of you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, but we'll have one more episode before New Year's. And I know that Christmas is one of those holidays that has lots of dichotomy to it, that there's lots of chaos, but then there's lots of opportunity for great memories, and it all builds up to that 15 minutes of opening up the presents, and then it's over. But that's part of the process, and that's something that I often reflect on going through the holidays, is that it's all part of the process. It's all part of life, and to try to exert control over it only makes it worse. You really have to ride the waves. You got to go with the flow, and there's going to be lots of moments that are chaos, but those are the ones that you often remember most later on when you reflect on the memory. If you haven't reviewed the podcast yet on iTunes, I would really appreciate it. That would be an amazing Christmas present for me to read one of those reviews leading up to this podcast. I read every one of those, and they mean the world to me. And if you've gotten value out of this podcast, I would also really appreciate it if you could share it with friends and let them know what we've got going on here with this podcast, because getting the word out to more and more military veteran dads is the best way that we can have to grow this podcast and make a bigger dent in the universe. And I'm so excited for 2020. I've got a lot of things to bring in, but I'm not going to unload those all right now because I'm going to save them for a little bit in a later episode. But today, getting back to Matt Kuchera, we have Matt Kuchera, who is our guest today, and I'm excited to share this episode with you. Matt served in the Air Force and recently transitioned out, and he has a common story that I think a lot of dads will relate to. He has one of those personalities that you just can't help but feel like you have been friends with him forever, and that you don't always want to say goodbye, because we really could talk forever. And we proved it because we talked for 40 minutes before we even hit record on this podcast. And he was a Air Force Military Training Instructor while being a dad. And there's a lot of life lessons that are coming home from that high intensity environment to just the average environment of home that he shares with us. And I think a lot of people are going to relate with this episode. And he also has his own podcast, Vet Pivot, that's also really great. And if you remember way back in the beginning, we interviewed Adam Bratz as well. And he is the co-host of the Vet Pivot podcast, and they both do it together. And I'm glad to have the other co-host finally on here. So without further ado, let's get this episode started. And again, Merry Christmas, and we'll talk before the new year. Thank you for coming on the show, Matt, today.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it, Ben.
We have just been talking back and forth for the last 40 minutes. So I feel like this is the very first time we got to know each other, but I feel like I already got to know you. And we just found out something crazy, is that your background is Czech, and I work for a Czech company. I've been to Prague more times than you, which is 0, and I've been 9. Right. So I feel like we've got this bond already to go. So I'm really excited for the magic that we're about ready to create now as we dive into the dad story, which somehow we avoided talking about any family for the last 40 minutes.
40 minutes, no family talk, strictly fun in business.
So now this entire next conversation is a mystery. So it's going to be fun.
That's right. We're going to unbox it.
So go ahead and unpack a little bit, Matt, on your backstory and what brought you to be a dad today.
Ooh, yeah. So my backstory, boy, I don't really know where to start here. I'll start and I'll go back to my days entering the Air Force. So I was not going in the right direction in life. And I think that a lot of people's enlisted story starts there. They needed direction, they needed discipline, they needed someone to kind of put the boot where it needed to be in order to get you going in the right direction again, and kind of, redirect the ship, if you will. So when I joined the Air Force at age 22, and having been, chewed up, spit out by life a little bit, it was a good move for me. It was like the best thing that I could ever do in my life. And as a result, from day one at basic training, getting screamed at, the stress, the pressure, I got a smile on my face because I know I made the right decision. I'm like, okay, I'm getting exactly what I need right now. And I'm going to.
This hell is still better than the one I came from.
What's that? Yeah,
this hell
exactly.
is still better.
Yeah. Hell is better than the one I came from. It was just like one of those things. You have a moment of clarity and you're like, yeah, I made the right call. Like, this is exactly what I needed to wake my ass up and get me going in the right direction. And so I was a sponge and I soaked it up and I did everything they asked to do. And that served me well as a young enlisted airman. It served me very well to kind of follow the rules and drink the Kool-Aid and do exactly what they tell, and indoctrinate myself into the system. And what better thing to indoctrinate yourself in than the core values that they try to instill upon you, the respect, the customs and courtesies, all these things that make you a stand-up citizen, not just a military member, but a citizen. So fast forward, I deployed for the first time. I was 2 years in, and I say deploy. It's an Air Force deployment.
I was going to say there's still a subprint there.
Yeah, there's definitely an asterisk there. So I went to Qatar. I was there for 7.5, almost 8 months. And when I got back, my wife at the time, unfortunately, her and I, we were having a rough time, but we were trying to work through things and make it work. And one of the things that brought us closer and helped us work through it a little bit was we had a kid, right? But that was just kind of a Band-Aid for us a little bit. And ultimately the marriage didn't work out. But from that, I have this beautiful boy who was born in Swanee in a Belgian hospital. And he's just such a smart kid. He's 9 years old, and he's everything that I wasn't at age 9, probably again at 10 and 11. As I watch him grow up, he will continue to be everything that I was not, in that he's good. He's a great student. He is respectful. I'll tell you a quick story real quick, since I'm telling my dad's story. Since age 4, really 3, I've been really working on making him self-sufficient, being able to do things on his own. This includes, you start with like one thing. All right, man. Hey, here's what you're going to do. You can take a shower and brush your teeth, right? That's your bedtime routine. So he takes a shower, brushes his teeth, he gets in bed. So you build on that. So the next thing is, okay, when you wake up in the morning, you're going to make your bed. And so you're building on all these things. Well, he is 9 years old, like I said now. And he's in his room. He's taking forever. We got somewhere to go. I say, Brody, we got to go. Like, come on, hurry up, let's go. And it kind of the drill instructor voice inside of me is starting to come out. And I go up there and I open up his door and I go, what are you doing in here? And he's like, Dad, couldn't leave before I clean my room.
You're like, damn you for using my words against me.
He's 9 years old in his room. He's like, yeah, cleaned it up, Dad. It's all good to go. Do you want to take a look? I'm like, no, we got to go. Dang it. Like, great. You cleaned your room. Good for you. But it's like in my head, I'm like doing a victory dance. I'm like, this is exactly what I've always.
That's a hell of a win, I would say.
Yeah. Is this kid understands that he's got responsibilities and that he has to take care of those things every single day, and he doesn't complain or moan about it. And with that, because he is that way, I give him a lot of rope. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, you can do that. And I trust him more to do things. And the flip side of that coin is I make sure that I have the conversation with him to say, hey, look, I trust you more because you're doing things that I expect you to do and ask you to do. And because you do those things without having to be told and stuff, it makes me trust you more. And so it's reinforcing the good behavior. But I did remarry, and I have a beautiful wife. We had 2 kids back to back. So we had Ella in 2016, and we had Sophie at the end of 2017. And
You
so
just wanted to get that barrel recharged right away, didn't you?
My goodness, I my wife and I weren't getting any younger, and we were, approaching mid-30s, and we were like, you know what, we just need to do this, and get it out of the way and be done with it. And then
there's something to be said for that. I often wish we had twins, because then that would have been like everything would have been the last thing.
Yeah.
Because once you're done with diapers, you're done. And
yeah,
there's a once you're a dad, you know that feeling when you're done with something. You're like,
that's right.
And then when you have that kid, so like we had 2 years apart, you're like, what the F were we thinking when you hit that reset button and you go back to the sleepless nights? And it's just like, what, were we on drugs when we thought this was a good idea?
Right. So we have a huge distance between my son and then my 3-year-old, right? That was, there was a 6-year gap there. So it's like, okay, well, 6-year-old can take care of himself.
And the 6-year-old can help raise kids too.
Exactly. Right. So we had a little teammate there. So it was like playing 3-on-1, right? So we're like, okay, we can handle another. So we had another one, and being 100% transparent here, we were not ready. Another one. We weren't ready. Now you're playing, you have my son who's like, now he's shell shocked, right? He's like crawling in a corner. He's like, I can't handle this.
What's going on here?
Yeah, like
there's too much everything.
There was and he's got 2 sisters, right? So he didn't even have a brother. He looks at me at one point. I'm like, hey man, do you think you'd ever, I was like, what do you think of your new sister? That's what I said. Yeah. So our 2-year-old's born. What do you think of your new sister? He's like, she's great, but Dad, please, no more. My son said this to me. He's 7 years old. Dad, please, no more kids, please.
This is enough trauma.
Yeah. And I was like, I know, man. I know. It was like the ending of a movie. It's like you just got through defeating the antagonist, and you're sitting there kind of retrospective and licking your wounds, and you're like, I know, man. Trust me, we're not doing this again. It's just kind of it kind of brought everything home. But I love my kids, and I love my family. It's definitely the. So
you got remarried and had your kids, your second daughters, while you were still in the Air Force, because you just recently transitioned out, correct?
That's right. Yeah. So I had, during my last assignment. So my 3-year-old was born in Texas while I was still doing the drill instructor duty, and then and shout out to my wife on that, because she was also a drill instructor in the Air Force, and she was marching trainees at like 8 months pregnant, in the San Antonio. It was like September in San Antonio. Like I have no idea how she did that. I'm
surprised the doctors let her do that.
I was very worried about her. Let me just tell you that right now. I was like always very worried about her. Like, are you okay? Like I would
every text message, you're like worried whether it was a message from her,
right,
or someone that's with her. Like, you got to come here now.
That's right. Then I would leave my flight and I would go pick her up in my air conditioned car. Like I'd have it on blasting, just AC cold. And I would take her back to her squadron so she didn't have to like march back. And then I would pick her up again. And I would take her back to pick up her flight. And like, you're not doing all this walking. Like you just, so there was a lot of things there. And then we had our 2-year-old was born in South Carolina while I was stationed at Shaw Air Force Base, which was the last place that I was stationed.
So you had to do a lot of even moving around while you were living in life in the pressure cooker there as well.
No, that's right. Yeah. So we did, so we sold our house. We moved out of our house in Texas. It got sold like 2 months later while we were already in South Carolina. So we did the living out of a hotel for 2 weeks, 3 weeks in South Carolina. And, my wife is pregnant, It's South Carolina. It's the summer. Yeah. It's July.
Well,
It's
at least she
July.
was training for it in San
Ugh,
Antonio. It wasn't
no
like it was her
kidding.
first rodeo.
No kidding. But it's just like, oh my goodness. It just, and then you're in the middle of a pregnancy. So you have to change doctors and you have to change, everything changes.
Your plan changes. You have everything
Yeah.
where you're going to have the
Yeah.
baby.
Exactly. And then we're buying a house and the house is empty and the furniture is not there yet from TMO. And you got a 1-year-old. So you're going to Walmart, like night one in the house that's empty. You're going to Walmart and you're buying a crib for your 1-year-old because you're going to need another crib anyways for the one that's on the way. And, we were in the trenches, and I just kept looking at my wife saying, look, I know it sucks right now, but in a couple years, it's going to be better, and that's the truth of it. I mean, and honestly, it does, it gets better, and it's gradual. It's like the type of get better that you have to look back and see where you came from to know where you are now is better. Right.
Yeah.
Because if you just look at it today, I'm like, oh man, this is terrible. Like, I want to go hide in my office and not interact. Right. Cause sometimes toddlers just get in the mood. But when you look back, it's like, okay, well, I can remember when you had to like make bottles for the littlest one. The other one is struggling with potty training or struggling with speech, or they're both walking, but neither is good at it. Those
running into things, pulling stuff off the tables.
Yeah. Yeah. And my 3-year-old is she's hell on wheels, man. She is.
Sounds like my 3-year-old. She's just a pistol that is a free spirit.
Yes. That's my 3-year-old. And she's just like, she's so like me. Like her attitude, the way she thinks about things, like the way she talks, like how she's independent, wants to do everything on her own. Like that's my 3-year-old. She's like me. And it
sounds like you're really hanging your hat on Brody. Is like, this is my success, and the other two, I'm not really sure where they're going to end up yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Brody is the one that I don't have to worry about. Ella, who's the 3-year-old, is the one that's going to give me gray hair. And the baby, Sophie, she is like brilliant. I know every parent probably says about their kids, right?
Mm.
But out of all my kids, she is really, really smart. She is like full sentences, talking since 18 months. Very, very verbal kid. She's very inquisitive. You can always tell she's like watching everything that's going on. Like, that girl loves to read books. She's my little bookworm. Like,
that's my 7-year-old. She just devours books.
Yeah. So that's Sophie. Sophie, I mean, she loves books. She would rather have a book than sit down and watch like Doc McStuffins or something. It's just, she loves books.
Your 3-year-old sounds like my 3-year-old would get along perfect, because she just started saying it. Like today, she's like, well, this is how it's going to go. And she's 3, like saying it just like that. Well, this is how it's going to go. This is what's going to happen. And we're like, where the F did this come from?
Yeah,
and she even tells you it was Odin, the daycare, that told her this. So it's like, you just can't. I mean, she's so smart. Like, she just figures things. She found my son. So my son went to kindergarten this year. She found his locker first before he did, because she can spell his name and notice it better than he can.
Wow.
He was 5.
Too smart for her own good.
Yeah.
Boys just have a hard time figuring it out.
I do, and he's not smart in how people measure smart. Like, he can build the Lego set, and that would rival anybody's airplanes. Yeah, but he doesn't. He just doesn't care about learning the alphabet.
No, that's like, look, us boys, like boy to boy, man to man, we suck at it. It takes us to figure it out. That's why I'm always so blown away by Brody. I'm like, dude, like, why are you so responsible? Like, what is wrong with you? Like, I find myself like, I need to pay you. Like, you need an allowance, and it needs to be a lot. A lot. Yeah. You need a hefty allowance. You're way too good, and I'm way too lucky.
So let me ask you a question. I got a new favorite question I like to ask you or ask guests. If you could go back in time and write a message on a sticky note and leave it on the table for Matt in those early years when your kids were still very young, under 2, what message would you write to put on the table for you yourself?
Oh man. For me, I think it would be perspective is everything. And just because something seems so obvious to me because I'm 35 years old doesn't mean that it is so obvious to a 3-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think with perspective comes patience, comes, the ability to bring yourself down to the level of the learner and give them what they need in order to be successful in learning the lesson that it is you're trying to teach them. And so for me, if I can gain my composure and have the perspective of my children, and what it must be like for them to see something or do something that is probably a first time offense. It's like they've never done this before. They've never encountered this situation. And that's so many things for a child, right?
So many things for a father. I'll
Yeah.
explain. I'll adopt a conversation with my 7-year-old and be like, you know how you're trying to figure out every day how to be 7 years old? Well, daddy's still trying to figure out how to be 35. That there's lots of things that I've never experienced and I still need to figure it out. Just like there's lots of things that you've never experienced and you're trying to figure out. And same thing with like emotions when they go crazy and be like, I'm 35 and if I can't regulate my emotions, how dare I judge my kids for not regulating theirs? Like it's up to me to set the example for.
Yeah.
And if you're shouting at them for shouting at you, like what, that doesn't work. You can't yell at them for shouting while you're shouting at them about shouting. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. You need to have the perspective that they don't have any difference and you do have understanding of that shouting isn't how you solve a problem. And so you have to keep that perspective. That's a really good answer for that, to be able to see it. I've always liked framing it in seasons of like making sure you have the right perspective in the right season. Like in those early years, it's always chaos. There's not a single person that doesn't have that. And you just need to, and the other part is you need to appreciate this season because before you know it's going to be gone and you'll be in another season that's just as pressure filled and you'll be almost wishing that it was simple. Like when your daughter's coming to you to talk about birth control, you'll be wishing that it was just the book that she wanted you to read one more time before going to bed. So like there's always that perspective on the season that you're in.
100%. And I think that especially when the kids are young, the roller coaster of the emotions where everything is extreme, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everything
you're
is
poopy head 1 minute and then they're giving you a hug 2 minutes later.
Right. Everything is extreme. Everything is like, Jekyll and Hyde, but you have extreme happiness and joy and elation, and then they go right to extreme anger, frustration, and then extreme sadness, and that it's crazy. It's a circus of emotions, and so with that comes your reaction. Why we react the way we do and why our kids have the ability to push our buttons like that is because we're not used to being at our stage in life or our season in life. We're not used to being on that roller coaster of emotions. It's like, what is happening? Right. And then we're thrown for a loop, because our whole, ecosystem of how we operate and how we navigate our world is like just thrown off kilter. We're just like, you get stuck and you're like, I know how to fix this. Like, stop.
And our kids push those buttons that are like our trigger. They know our trigger points and they know exactly that 2% that we don't have control over it, where we suck at, and they'll push their finger in that 2% and push that button. And I always like to frame when a kid triggers you, that generally says more about you than it does about them.
Yeah.
Because whatever it's triggering you is usually either some insecurity or something you don't want to talk about or something you don't want to admit, or maybe it's some reality or some truth that you're afraid to tell yourself. And your kids just are able to reflect it back in a very innocent and clear way, but you're not really to really accept what's being reflected back. And
there's a lesson there for sure. For each parent. And that's another one too. I mean, that'd be a great sticky note too, is like, be open-minded, be willing to learn. You're not perfect. Here's another one. Like I mean, those they sound like cliches. I kind of wrap that all up into perspective because I think that captures everything. It's like, okay, well, keep things in perspective. I love my kids, and I miss the moments where they're just little balls of,
Yeah.
poop and burps, and it's like,
They just slept on your arms after a bottle, and that's all you had to worry
exactly.
about.
And you just like, I don't know if you ever heard like the Rockabye Baby lullaby
Yep.
tune. Yeah, so they have them for all the different. They have them for like Rolling Stones and Clapton and Elton John and all of them. Yeah, Metallica. There's all kinds. I used to play those for my daughters when they're real little, and I would have my phone next to me, and so I'd put that on because they're on Amazon Music, and so it'd be like songs that I like, but turned into like a music box, and it's so that it's appealing to children. And what's cool is my 3-year-old, when she was an infant, she loved it, and it would put her out. Like if she was crying, I'd put one of those on, out, like the Journey one. Oh, out. Like Don't Stop Believing, she's out. Like gone, like a light. But my 2-year-old hated them. It'd make her scream more. And so I'd have to I built a playlist of like 108 different classic rock songs, like the actual song, not some music box, like the actual song. And I started playing those. No more tears. She just stopped crying. And so to this day, I have that playlist, and I still put it on in the car, and yeah, she loves it.
I got a question for you to peel back. Okay. I'm debating because you had such different perspective. I'm going to let you go either way. Which was it more impactful when you held your son for the first time or your daughters?
Ooh,
because it has a different meaning for dads to hold your daughter because what they're gonna grow up into, a strong woman. And at the same time, when first time you become a father, I was curious what emotions were going through your head, because there's often like just insecurity as men that we have anything to, we are ready to be a dad, and then when you hold that little baby in your arms and look up to you, and it's like, this is really not my responsibility.
Well, I cried. I will say that I cried with all 3 of my kids when they were born, and I held them. It's just something powerful there that happens.
Do you think you were prepared to become a father, or was it something that was kind of like scary?
No, I was always really excited to be a father, and I've always been really good with kids my whole life. I'm a kid. And that's cliche too, right? But I am a goofball, man. I love to have fun. With my daughters, we do dance parties. They know how to make Alexa play songs that
we are gonna be friends forever, because I do dance parties with Alexa in the living room all the time. That's the best function of Alexa, is to pay $3.99 and have every song for a dance party that you've ever wanted.
Exactly. And that's how we do it constantly. And we put on, my daughters have like dress up princess dresses, like for all the Disney princesses and stuff. And they just, they want to be twirled around and lifted up and dance silly. And yeah, we have a blast. But yeah, I love being a dad. I was always really excited to be a dad. I think that when I held my son for the first time, it was just like a really powerful thing. It's like, you're my boy and I love you. I'm going to teach you everything I can, and that's kind of the thoughts going through my head. And I don't worry about them, and I haven't, and I have really never worried about them. But I worry about my daughters, and I don't need to. But here's the thing. When I had my daughters, it was, okay, I now feel this immense pressure to show them the image of what a man should be.
Mm-hmm. So because they will go out and copy what you project. They will find.
Yeah. So when they find their, when they're looking for their spouse in the future, or when they're, just a boyfriend, whatever.
When they're 40, right?
Yeah. When they're maybe. Let's not get too early here. But yeah, I think I want them to measure any guy that they're with against me, knowing that they'll never match up. That's the pressure I feel like no one will ever be your dad.
Yeah. And I think that's where the dad cliche comes, where you have the shotgun dad. But I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of times those dads, I never really had this thought, but you could probably conjecture that the dads that do have a shotgun at the door are the ones that are insecure about the man they were as
Right.
they were growing up, and they know
Right.
who they're going to bring home.
Yep.
And they're like, I'm not going to let her walk in the door with any version close to myself, because they
Right.
know they weren't who exactly they wanted to model.
Right. And the other part of me is I need to, and I feel this great responsibility to teach them to be strong, independent, confident women that are capable of doing anything for themselves. That's, they don't need to rely on anyone to be able to exist. They can, so that comes with like making sure that they have all the tools and skills required that, maybe other girls that they know don't have. I don't know. I always think it's important to teach them how to maintain a house, maintain a car, be financially responsible.
Have you ever seen the Netflix movie Christmas Chronicles?
I have not.
It's a
Is
good
it
movie.
good?
It's my new favorite Christmas movie. It came Netflix. It's original, so they invented it last year, and I just wrote a blog post about it, so it's fresh in my mind. And I really have got this idea that the best gift at Christmas you can give your kids is the belief in themselves, and that sounds like what you're already on the road to do, like letting your kids know or teaching them to know that they have everything they need to be successful in life right inside. They
Yeah.
don't need anybody else around them to believe what they're doing is right, to give them permission to do what they believe is to be right, and to have that confidence to go out in the world. And because they know they have everything that it takes, they'll generally go out and do it. And in the movie, there's a knife. The dad dies in a fire because he's a firefighter. And the dad has this heirloom that he passes to his son that says in the back, "A Pierce always sees it through." And at the end, his son saves Christmas because this saying is essentially kind of his dad's legacy of a Pierce always sees it through, and that the son always had everything he needed inside, which was confidence. And that confidence then saves Christmas and ends with a happy ending. But the son had to believe in himself that he had everything that he needed inside to be successful. And I
Right.
feel like in 2019, it's already a problem. So I can only imagine when our kids are out there in the world, that the amount of external validation that people look for on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all these things that leave people empty inside, that when life does throw you a hardball, like a death or maybe the death of a parent, you won't know how to keep moving forward, because no one's going to tell you how to move forward, because it's your own issue that you got to feel for. And if you don't know that you have everything inside already, those hard problems are be the ones that stop you in your tracks.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I mean, I think allowing your kids to experience, some adversity and some failure is important, especially throughout their life. Right. So you're trying to teach them, you're trying to gauge how successful are you at giving them confidence
Mm-hmm.
and the skills and tools they need to be able to overcome adversity. But on top of that, those are the things, those are character building moments, I think is what I've heard them called before. That I like the most. You hear it called a bunch of different things, but I always like it the most when people say that's a character building moment. That's something that it really makes you who you are. When I was doing the basic training instructor, drill instructor thing, I used to tell kids that that got in trouble, that that I had to counsel in my flight office. I used to tell them, hey, listen up. I just want you to know one thing. And I always left them on a positive. Like, I'm going to forget about this. It's how you react from this point forward and what you do now that I will start judging you on. Right. And if we have to have this conversation again, then, obviously we'll have to document it and we'll go forward and I'll give you a clean slate again. But just know, like, it doesn't, there's not like a running tab against you. Right. I think that message is important for your kids too, because you're with them, you're with them until they leave the nest. And it's very important that they know there's not a running tab against them. There's not this scorecard where you're saying, hey, look, that's
Yeah,
like,
that to earn your father's love, that you have to do X amount of brownie points. I've
right.
always liked the dad to describe it like there is nothing you can do to make me love you less than I do right now, and that kind of gives them permission to trust that they can always bring whatever's on their heart or whatever they're dealing with, because
Yeah.
they're not going to avoid it because of how you're going to love them less. That they know that you're going to love them more, even
Right.
because they did come to you, and those are. It all goes back to, I feel like there's so many kids today that are just failed to launch because they didn't have the confidence to take action on their own. Like they've just been waiting for someone to come up to them and say, "Hey, okay, it's your turn, go."
Yeah.
Really, it comes from inside, that you've got to be able to go forward. And there's a good Zig Ziglar quote that I was reminded of today, that he often says that failure is an event, not a person. And yesterday really did end last night. And today's a brand new day. And that's always kind of how
Yeah.
you have to frame it. That there's a good book that you might like as your girls get older. It's called "Someday a Bird Will Poop on You." And it's pretty much that. It's just like it says, that no matter how good of a day you're having, no matter what kind of mood you're in, good or bad, someday a bird will just fly by and poop on your shoulder. And it's up to you to decide how to react to it. You can either react positively to it and say, "Yeah, whatever, brush it off and be done," or it can ruin the rest of your day. But that's a choice that happens when a bird poops on you. And
Yeah.
that's what this book is teaching you. And we did, maybe like in first grade, I think we called the bird poop talk. So we would talk every night in bedtime of what we would, what upset her, what we would call it, what kids pooped on her, because they were someone that just like throw something at her in her life or that day, and it would frustrate her and emotionally get her wound up. And I feel like that's one of the hardest things that as a father I face with my daughter, is coaching her through what she's feeling and making sure she's feeling what she needs to feel, because there's so many emotions that they have, and they go from the roller coaster, and making sure that they are processing them, but then making sure they understand what it means. And I really like what we've just started. We got a journal. So she's in second grade now, so she can write and do all that stuff and critical think. So we
Right.
write down something that made her grateful, something that made her happy, something that made her sad, and 1% better that she's going to work on tomorrow. And
Right.
that's really helped her kind of reflect, almost as like that things are getting better. Like there's times where she'll go back and compare, and she can see kind of progress. And I've already seen different things already improve. Like I was gone for a week for work, and she was journaling when I came back. And so when I came back, we were talking about what she wrote down. And one of them, she realized that when mommy gets mad at her, it's often because she made a choice that made mommy mad, and that she had the ability to change the situation all on her own. She came to that conclusion all on her own.
Yeah.
I can only think that happened because we've been talking about it for 2 years now, about how your choices have consequences, and the reaction you have to an emotion is just that. It's a reaction. It's either positive or negative, and it's
That's
your
right.
choice.
Yeah. I love that. And my son journals. I journal. I'm if you've been listening to Vet Pivot, I'm a avid journaler. It's very important for me to teach my kids that skill too. The ability to write down your thoughts and ideas is powerful, because it allows you to go back and be reflective. Right now, I can look at what I was thinking in that moment, and I can build on that. Okay, well, was I right? How did that situation turn out? Okay, well, maybe next time I'm faced with this situation, I don't have to feel that way, because I know how situations like that are going to play out. And me feeling so stressed out about it, or me, feeling sad about it, me being, happy about it and getting my hopes up, like stuff like that. It just allows any person to be able to go back and look and say, okay, well, I played that one wrong, and I can play it better next time. Or, hey, I played that one right, and good for me. Like that's what I'm going to do going forward. That was done well. And look, I wrote it down, and I can see like that's where my thought process was. So I think that's really cool that you have your second grader journaling, right? I think that's such a good skill that you can teach her. My other thought on this is, I think that having that talk about consequences with your kids. My son is always big on that. I was telling him, Birdie, I was a terrible student. And I was telling him how proud I was about his report card. And he got straight A's, and he was so thrilled. And I was like, hey, look, man, I'm really proud of you. Like, that's really good stuff. I was like, I don't think you understand. Like, not every kid is sitting in their parents' car right now talking about straight A's. Some kids are having a tough time. Some kids aren't making good grades. Some kids aren't putting the time in at home because they're dealing with other things. So we always try to be mindful, but also understand that like actions have consequences. Like everything you do, Brody, I was not a good student all the way through high school, not a good student. That had consequences.
Mm-hmm.
What were your consequences, Dad? Okay, well, my consequences were I didn't go to a great college right away. I probably could have gone to a much better one and played baseball there. I went to a smaller school and played baseball, and even then, I didn't have a good foundation of work ethic as a student, and so I didn't do well in school. I was in college because I didn't do well in school in high school. And he's like, "Oh, so what happened?" I left college because I didn't maintain a good GPA, and I had to go, and I had to go get a job. And he's like, "Oh, when did you join the Air Force?" I said, "After I had a bunch of jobs." I was like, there are consequences to actions, and so I just want you to understand that there are both good and bad consequences. And when you have a negative action, there's a negative consequence that goes with that. And when you have a positive action, then you'll have a positive consequence that goes with that. And it just is what it is. But it's, teaching your kids that to think beyond right now in the moment is very, very powerful. It's one of the best tools that you can give them, because from there they understand, okay, well, this is how life works.
Yep.
If I have a few too many drinks at dinner and I get behind the wheel of my car and I drive and I get pulled over and I get a DUI and I lose my job and I have to pay all these fines, those are all the consequences to that one bad decision that you made that can really impact and mess up your life. If I go out and get a credit card when I'm 18 and I max that thing out, even though I don't have a job, right? And then I can't pay that off and it gets sent to collections, and my credit score, when it's just getting started, starts to drop and drop and drop. It's going to impact things later on in life in a very bad way. So you're teaching them how to handle that line of reasoning before they have to handle that line of reasoning.
Yep. Have you ever given your son the idea to try to find the Matt in his class that isn't as good, that does struggle, that he could be the flashlight for his shadow?
Ooh, that's a really good idea. I've never given him that idea, and I love that.
Because somewhere in his class, there's a Matt Kuchera. And if your son is the kind of guy, and he seems like a very heart-centered person, another way I've always liked to say it is there's someone in that classroom that has a storm going on, and your son could be that rainbow.
Yeah. I'm writing it down right now. I'm so big about taking notes that I have a Samsung Note. It's like that. It's that important to me. So I need to write this down. So my son will find the person that is just as messed up as I was, which is good.
And the biggest thing that I've realized with this podcast is the friendships are the most common thing that veterans need on the other side of transition. And that's often what kids needs. And I had to speak to a veterans, or my daughter's elementary class for Veterans Day. And the message I gave them was that there's lots of veterans out there that are sitting on the buddy bench in the playground waiting for a friend to come by because there's a buddy bench on their playground. And they all knew what the buddy bench was and how it worked. And I'm like, well, there's a veteran out there that needs a friend, and friendships are the best way that you can help them. And there's lots of veterans that have storms, and you can be that rainbow. And they all instantly kind of got that message in a very kid way. But friendships are the most common way that, and there's probably somewhere in that classroom, there's a Ben Cloy, because I was maybe a little bit smart, but I was very shy and looking for friends. But friends is the one thing that in the last 5 years has really allowed me to move forward as a dad and a husband, and even now as a podcaster. But without that, it's just so lonely that you really can't feel like you can do anything on your own.
Yeah, 100%. I was always, and we talked about this a little bit before we started this recording, but I was Oh, I've always been extroverted, extra extroverted, right? That's what I usually tell people. Um, and so like the friend side of it, the more the merrier, I've always been the type person, to a fault, it's distracting at times. And so I'm like always very mindful of telling my kids like, okay, you need to focus. I know that like I know there are a bunch of other kids around right now. I know that what they're doing looks like it's more important than what I need you to do, but focus, like just look at me, stay with me, and then we'll go play.
Did you tend to go deep with the friendships, or was it more about the, like, maybe you were moving from friend to friend or trying to create more, but not having the deep connection with the friend?
Oh, it's definitely quantity over quality. Yeah. I have room in my life for like two or three really, really good friends. And
Is it the way you
um,
want it, or is that something you're working on?
that's something I'm working on. I would love to have more like deep connections with people. It's very difficult because I'm very prone to like just really opening up and being accepting of people. And then, it's one of those things like as we grow older, there's been more opportunities and more situations where we've been burned.
Mm-hmm.
And so, those defense mechanisms become a little more entrenched into who we are. And so I do find a way to kind of not uh, give friendships like my whole self, my whole persona, and be completely vulnerable and honest. I do keep it somewhat closer to the surface. Don't want to. In on the inside, it's like, no, you can create a deeper connection, and then something just stops you. You're like, I don't know,
Do you
maybe.
feel like it's ego?
I think I'm just more interested sometimes in them and like
Mm-hmm.
what their story is.
Yeah.
And I don't. It doesn't hurt my feelings if someone doesn't ask me, and return the favor and ask me my story.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think it helps me with the podcast, right? So it's like, yes, tell me your story, and I'm very interested and engaged. And if you don't ask me in return, because that's not typically how a podcast interview goes, right? Then it's like, um, I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me, right? So it's a way for me to kind of feed my defense mechanism, if you will. I get to know people, and if they don't ask me, then I don't have to go like deeper.
So this isn't necessarily your most default state, answering questions and being on the other side to go deep with a random stranger.
This is again, I'm comfortable with it, and I will, and I have no problem telling my story. I think that there are so many parts of my um, just my life story that they're mine, and I don't open up too much for just about anyone. um I don't know why. I think for me, I'm like very optimistic type person, and I just, okay, look, it goes back to what I was saying before. Like, I know where I came from sucked, and I know where I'm at now is better, and I know where I'm going is going to be better than where I came from, even though there's going to be some obstacles along the way. And so I just, looking forward is always better. I don't necessarily want people to like, oh man, that's tough. I'm sorry that happened to you, or wow, I can't believe that you went through. Like
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't help me. You know what I mean? Because then I feel like, oh gosh, this is tough. From a parent standpoint, I'm more vulnerable with my kids than I am with anybody.
I would say that's a place that it counts, because your story helps them understand that you're not perfect and that your life experiences can help. I think that's why military dads leave so much on the table by not waking up to our potential, because we've just experienced a whole lot of life. We're less than
Yeah.
1% of the population that have experienced life in such an extreme way. And by us not sharing those lessons learned with our kids, we're just leaving so much on the table for who they can become with those
Yeah.
shortcutted lessons of who we are.
Yeah, 100%. And the other part of that too that I'll say is it's less scary to do that with your kids, especially when they're like younger.
Oh yeah.
They don't.
They
They're
don't
not gonna,
judge you.
they're
They're
not
not
judging
looking.
you.
Yeah.
You're still their hero, and so you can be real with them, and as long as you keep it at their level of understanding in how the world works and find a way to explain it to them in words they can understand, um, you really it can be very relieving, therapeutic for you as a veteran or military dad, and it can be really building, a great building block for them to gain some perspective that they wouldn't otherwise had, like you were saying.
Got it. Well, I'm going to ask one more question here that maybe goes a little bit deeper, but I think you're ready for it. I think you're warmed
All
up.
right.
So if you were to think of the Matt Kuchera in your first marriage and the Matt Kuchera who showed up in your second marriage, what do you think the biggest change that you had to do on yourself to make your second one successful? Because that's a theme of that a lot of active duty and veterans have, where they have one marriage that doesn't work out and they get into one that does. What would you maybe think of a note that you would write back to that, maybe that guy in your second marriage when you first got married, or even if you thought about what you could have done better in your first one, what advice would you give out there for what someone needs to go through to improve themselves?
Yeah. That's I mean, of course I think about that. Of course, and I think it's natural to do so, right? As a human being, and when you go through that process, for anyone that's um, broken up with someone, or anyone who's got out of a long-term relationship, or anyone that's got divorced before, it's not fun, and it takes a minute to rebuild yourself and figure out who you are again, because you absorb some of the person that you tie yourself to. um but it's natural in that process of healing from that event, that you ask yourself, what could I have done? And so if I were to leave a note for Matt, right, I would say don't be so selfish. Find ways to be less selfish, because and that's really what it boils down to. um I should have. It's very easy, and sometimes I feel like cop out to say I should never got married, when really in life sometimes you just gotta take risks, and when it feels right you just got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
um because in your failures you learn more than in your success. I think we
Oh
know
yeah.
this, right? That's a common understanding that we have. um and that goes for relationships too. So yeah, it's a failure, yeah, it hurts. I have a beautiful son from it, and um his mom and I are able to talk, and we've moved on in our lives. It's been years. So um I think that's one of the things that has made this marriage better, is that very much more emphasized on family and that time, quality time. Granted, I don't get as much time with the family as I would love to have, especially during the week because of work. So I go to work when the kids are sleeping. I come home, it's, hour and a half, 2 hours before bedtime. So it's tough, but I think that would be the biggest message, would be like, hey, you need to be less in your 20s and more in your family.
Mm-hmm.
It's less about hanging out with the guys and more about making time for the people that are there for you, or we're always going to be there for you.
I didn't have this when I first started. It kind of came through breadcrumbs, but I had one episode where a guy gifted me the advice that when you come in the door, always kiss your wife first. And that signals to your kids the priorities, that she's more important. I love you and all, but I love her more. And it kind of has been a theme that I talk about, that the one commitment that will go to all the way next to death is the commitment to your wife. Every other commitment,
Yeah.
your career, your kids, even your kids are going to leave you. They're going to go off and do their own thing.
Yep.
They'll still come back at Christmas and Thanksgiving, but there's only one commitment that's there till the end, and that's one you've made with your wife.
That's right.
And if you don't align your life and your priorities to reflect that commitment as the number one, all the other things seem like you're juggling something almost like a Jenga game, trying to pull out these blocks and making sure the tower doesn't come down and figuring out which ones are the right ones to pull. Is this one starting to jiggle the whole thing? And you really need that solid foundation where your wife is a priority, even over your kids, because even through the dark times, the hard times, making sure that you have a relationship with your wife. I mean, there's lots of stories that I hear where the kids leave the house and the married couple is a stranger to themselves because they spent all their time prioritized on the kids, either through sports or just letting the kids, or just focusing on, maybe they were living vicariously through their kids even. And if you don't make that commitment to rekindle that love every single year throughout all of life, then there'll always be something that is kind of like you're gambling in Vegas to see who wins.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I mean, there's something to be said for picking and choosing your battles. There's something to be said for continuing to find ways to date your spouse. There's something to be said for, just keeping your priorities in line.
In the military, it's such a drag on this because it's so easy to prioritize our military service because it's a noble sacrifice that most people say, yeah, that you're doing a good thing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really make a deposit in the marriage bank.
No,
and it's
not at all.
And even when you deploy, I reframe it that when you're away, you're borrowing from a credit card from your family. And when you get back, the interest is due and the payments are due. And you need to make sure it's repaid back in full as much as you can, hopefully before you get deployed again. But it's all a credit card when you borrow that time, and you need to make sure that, because like you mentioned, time and priorities, and even with kids, like the biggest first step for any dad that's struggling to come home is kids spell love TIME, that all they want is your time. And that's really, even in a marriage, time is one of the biggest things that can heal, especially if you've been deployed or away from each other. Time can do a lot of healing.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think that, being a leader of your family is important, right? And you cannot lead your family, you cannot lead people if you cannot lead yourself. It means being able to prioritize your time and effectively manage your schedule. It means taking care of yourself. So, like from a mental health standpoint, I think that was something that damaged my first marriage as well. And then just being forgiving, and working at it.
Mm-hmm.
I think in my 20s I was too immature to like work at the problems, and so they just got bigger until they couldn't be overcome.
A lesson that you just reminded me of, I'm surprised I didn't remember it earlier. The very first time I went to Prague, Czechs actually taught me an important lesson that I did not learn or implement, but it'll be one that my kids I will implement. So I'm curious to see if you have the same perspective. But it was very quickly I learned that in the Czech Republic that they don't get married till they're 30, and that almost nobody has kids unless by accident before 30. Like that's kind of a milestone. Like, okay, I'm ready to have kids. But their kind of way of life is like they spend all their 20s finding the person that they want to love for the rest of their life, living life with that person in just a kind of a frillful way of taking crazy vacations, doing crazy things, living adventure, and learning to build a solid foundation with that person. And only when they reach 30 do they settle down and move into that next stage, because they have a great solid foundation to build from. And in America, it's the exact opposite. Is if you're 25 and not having kids, you're behind. And that's why we have midlife crises, because you never got a chance to live. And sometimes that's why maybe one person wants to divorce, because maybe they settled down too quickly and they had kids and they never got a chance to live. But that 20s is so important to build that solid foundation with the person you love, and not just rush into it, but just truly fall in love with the bliss of love for almost 10 years, because that foundation that you coming home with your kids then is a completely different mindset than if you're trying to battle two worlds of partying in the weekends and being a mom at the same time.
Yeah, that's very European. That's like a very European mindset about it versus the American thing. So maybe not just Czech, but
well, it's the only country I've been to, so I'm biased a little bit.
Oh, yeah, it's super European. But I mean, you think about it. I don't know if when you go to the Czech Republic, if they ever got you into soccer, but I lived there for 3 years, so I got really big into soccer. So Barcelona back in the day, back in the day, 10 years ago, unbeatable, unstoppable. And same with Spain as a national team. And the reason why is because those kids all played together and grew up in the same system all the way through. And so when they got to the professional stage, or the highest stage on earth when it came to the sport, they had been doing that together for 10, 15 years, so naturally they knew where each other were going to be. They knew how to communicate. It was almost like they were communicating without even saying anything. So they had nonverbal communication cues that they were picking up on, and they just had a feel for each other and how to navigate the field, right? And so it just made them unbeatable, and they won. Tons of games. Very difficult to step on the field against and expect to get a result. That's what you're talking about, right? The European way of doing it, having that 10 years of being with this person, getting to know this person. One of my best friends in this world is Belgian, and we met each other in high school. And so when the military stationed me there, it was like, dude, we get to hang out like all the time for 3 years. Like, this is amazing. So it was a really big win for us. And he dated the same girl from when we were 21. Yep, 21, because we're the same age. So from 21, and they didn't get married until he was 29, 28 or 29. And then they just started having kids like a couple years ago.
And so, I mean, I don't know if it absolutely have to be a decade, but there's definitely something to be said for slowing down, and that life isn't a race. And if you don't slow down to smell the roses, or to just learn who we really are, even like how many people rush through, get married, and get a car payment, a house, and then they have a job they don't like, and they have debt. And like, the American dream is almost a prison, because you rush through the system to a point where you can't stand the view from where you're standing, but you don't see a way out.
Just don't know how you got there. You feel like you time traveled, right? You woke up and
you don't realize your own choices are the reason why you got there, and you're probably not ready to admit that your choices are the reason why you got there to be able to move out of it. But
the consequences of your choices,
of keeping up with the Joneses, of not living your life in your own way versus what other people want you to live.
Yeah. And just, I mean, not giving things time to go from beginning to end in the process, right?
Yeah. I mean, even just living in Belgium for 3 years, that widened your view of the American dream for what you see as possible for your own life. And I feel like that's what kids really, that's what, as dads, and my obligation, my kids, is to make sure they have that wide view, because when they go out into the world, they want to kind of have an idea already who they are, and they're not going to get it from the system. The system isn't going to teach them what they want to be for the rest of their life. But you got to add those experiences and show them there's just not one path to have life. There's just not a trade job or a factory job. Life can be really whatever you created on your terms. And you have to be able to see other things to do that. And there's the crazy statistics that 20% of Americans have a passport and only 10% use it. And if you think about like how insular that view of the world is, that there's only 10% of the people that actually know a different way of living other than what they see on TV, which isn't even anything close to reality. Like, and you take your kids on an international trip to Europe, like, you have no idea the amount of like perception that.
My so Brody has been to Italy. Obviously, he was born in Europe, so he's traveled all over Europe. This summer, his mom has to do trips to Japan for work. So this summer, he went to Japan for a month.
Yeah, like those experiences, you never know what those are going to do for him.
Yeah. And he's
at 8. I mean, that's like a perspective that like you can't buy anywhere. You can't buy that on Target Cyber Monday.
Yeah, he just came back talking about how 7-Eleven in Japan is so much better than 7-Eleven here. I said, shut up.
I don't know anybody that says the 7-Eleven is better anywhere.
Yeah, I know. That was like his takeaway from Japan. I was like, really? Like, you have any other takeaways?
I'm sure there's probably other takeaways. He just doesn't know what to use, or he hasn't processed the thought of how it fits in yet.
There's no idea how to bring it up.
It was a bunch of seeds planted, but they all still waiting to be watered.
Yeah. But it's cool. It's still something he gets to tell his friends, a little bragging thing. He was born in Belgium and went to Japan for a month. Like
I've read a couple articles that said that military kids are a very unique type of person because they've grew up with diversity to the point where they don't even really judge diversity as bad or good. They just see it as is. And they've learned how to, and even military, we've learned how to get along with people that we don't like for a lot of different years.
Yep.
And that's a skill that we're actually in 2019 in our society that a lot of people need. So if we can really create strong adults to go out in the world, these kids will change the world if they believe they can.
Yeah. Yeah. They need the confidence for sure. Yeah. It's fun. Like being a dad is, it's the greatest job in the world.
And it's the greatest title that you can get called. It's like when you get called dad, like every time I hear daddy, I just like pause and be like, there's just nothing better than that title when they call you daddy, because it's something special.
There's that moment I walk through the door every single day when I come home.
And they just swarm you.
And they tackle you. Yeah. And they want nothing more than to just have you around and just anything you do with them, just being silly. Like, oh man, like to all the dads out there, just be silly with your kids. Like, don't be serious with them.
Enter their imagination.
Yeah.
And no matter how bad of a day you had, their love for you is still just as equally as charged. Like nothing that happened to you that day is going to take anything less of what they're going to greet you with.
Take a deep breath before you go through the door. The meeting went bad. Your boss is breathing down your throat. Like whatever, just take a deep breath before you go through the door and just be silly and enter your kids.
You will always be enough in the eyes of your kids.
And you'll feel better when you're done. You will feel better when you're done. They have this ability to just wipe away all the crap, and just make you smile. They'll do something that just puts a big smile on your face. Like, I don't know. I can name 1,000 things my kids do. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys are the best.
Exactly. And they're just getting started.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so much fun.
Well, Matt, if I got one last question for you, if you could wrap up all your wisdom, what advice would you want to leave for a military veteran dad out there listening to this episode?
Oh man, I feel like
maybe you haven't given yet.
Yeah. Yeah. One piece of advice for the military veteran dad listening to this episode would be, that's a good question, Ben.
Let's make it specific. What advice would you give to Matt Kuchera, that's the Air Force drill instructor that has a high demand job that has to come home and be dad?
I would say your kids don't get it. Like that would be my big thing. Like they don't get it, and that's okay. They're not supposed to. But I would say on the other side of that coin is you should never stop hustling and working hard to be the best dad and to give your kids the best life, right? Whatever that looks like for your family. I work long hours in my full-time job. I come home, I hang out with my kids, have a great time. I enter their world. We're silly. We do dance parties. We do all kinds of crazy stuff. And then, I sing to them when they go to bed, and then it's back to work. I do podcast stuff. I work on my schoolwork. It's just nonstop, always doing something, trying to better myself so that my kids have a positive example of hard work, of selflessness, of what it takes to have work ethic and make it in this world. All those things are important. So yes, you need to understand they don't get it, but through your actions, eventually they will. And that's
a funny story about they do get it in certain cases. I've come home, and it was during the summer, I think, that my daughter would be sitting in my office right in my chair with these headphones on, sitting next to this microphone telling me, "Daddy, go away. I'm in a meeting." Because that's what, from her side, that's what I'm always telling her. I'm like, in a meeting, you gotta be quiet. And so she's in here mimicking me like, "Daddy, I'm in a meeting. Go away."
Yeah. Yeah. They do in some instances get it. Like if you have it on your face, like my 3-year-old will call it, "Daddy, why are you grumpy?" I'm like, I'm not grumpy. I'm sorry. I'm not grumpy. That's like her big thing. And now the 2-year-old, it's like the worst thing you could ever do to this 2-year-old is to call her grumpy. Like when she's in a mood, hey, you're being grumpy, full blown, like fit, just, I'm not grumpy. And you're like, all right.
Damn you for
Learning
reflecting back my words.
Yeah. Learning how to push your buttons here, it's like, so.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate this conversation. Yeah. Where's the best place for people to get a hold of you if they want to find out more about the Vet Pivot podcast?
Yeah, you want to know about the Vet Pivot podcast, and thank you for asking. You can go to www.vetpivot.com and catch everything that's going on there. The podcast is also every Monday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern time. It launches the next iteration. So we're on episode 12, drops tomorrow with Scott R. Tucker. Very excited to have that go into our 12th episode, a full quarter of episodes. And those are all available on all the different platforms, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, everything, you name it. Ask Alexa, she'll play it for you, whatever you want.
Well, it's a very good podcast, and I recommend anybody out there in the transition listening to it. It's a bunch of two guys. The other guy, Adam Bratz, who's been on the podcast way back in episode 19 or something. So now both of you guys have been on the podcast, and right. Two guys telling jokes and using military banter to lighten heart in the situation, but also giving practical advice. So I enjoy it a lot.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ben. We got to have you on the show. We got to bring you on.
Adam says you guys are backed up too much.
We are, we can move things around.
He says you can't move things around. You're backed up to Valentine's Day or something.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I don't know who you got to bribe over there to move up. Yeah, but they haven't figured out the right price.
I know one of the owners. So I think I can get you in the show.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on tonight. And I know this conversation was vulnerable and real. And I know we brought a few dads home.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. Thank you.
That's a wrap. And thank you for listening to today's show, and I really hope you enjoyed it. The lifeblood of any new podcast are the reviews. If you haven't reviewed the podcast yet on iTunes, I would really appreciate it, and you will help us get the message out to even more military veteran dads. As John Maxwell says, if there is hope in the future, there is power in the present. Dads, it's time to come home.